Why don't we, for the sake of time, and now, why don't we at least get introductions started, and then folks can roll in as we keep moving along here. My name is Greg Deschmaker. The title of this session, just to make my title up here varies a little bit different, but trust me, you're in the right place if you came to work for the future, the people factor of shifting to mobile. And the reason why we have the label up here, personalized learning, is because our special guest today is Jason Messer. Jason, Superintendent of Manteca Unified School District. Jason's been the superintendent, well, he's been with Manteca for the last, as he put it a little bit ago, 13 or 14 years ago. He wasn't quite sure what the exact amount of time of that has been. But, and I especially wanted Jason to come and speak to you all today. And we're going to do this in kind of interview fashion. I'm new. Jason and I have been working a lot together over the last year. I also work directly as the guy with Intel who manages all of our public sector business here in Northern California. I work directly with the state, a lot of you folks who are with the counties. And I really wanted to invite Jason to join us because he is in this unique position of, number one, managing his own workforce of 3,000 people within the district, but then he also is developing that future workforce that you all are going to be hiring at some point, 23,000 students strong. And we think about the role that technology is playing in that, but more importantly, how that evolution is happening. And we're going to get into a discussion for the next 45 minutes to an hour along those lines, and hopefully drive this conversation in a way that stimulates some creative thinking, and well, hopefully we send you off maybe with even more questions than answers, but hopefully they're the right questions of what to be asking yourselves when you think about your own work environments, what you need to be doing to really, because we know one of the challenges. I just got back from NASCIO. It was 2 or 3 weeks ago out in Nashville. So all of the state CIOs coming together from across the country, the number one theme of that session, you know, when we talk about what's top of mind for state CIOs, and of course there were issues around security and big data and cloud, and the number one thing I heard though while at that event, workforce development. That was consistently the number one theme, regardless of what the topic was of the session that I went into. So when we think about, you know, we have this event today all around mobile, and shifting to mobile is great, but if we put a mobile device in every employee's hands, or if we stand up a mobile app for whatever organization you're with so that it caters to our constituents, that alone hasn't really addressed the transformative aspects of what is possible. So that's really the spirit of what our discussion is going to be here today. And so with that, I'm going to, Jason, you want to add anything else in terms of your own introduction?
Sure, just a couple things. But first off, I am an educator at heart, so I'm going to rearrange the room. If you want to participate with me today, I hope you will stay, and I invite you to do that. I do think we're going to have a dynamic conversation. But to start with, everybody stand up, please. Exactly, move to the front. But if I wasn't even inviting you to move to the front, because I will be honest, if you move to the front, I'm going to be more relaxed. If I'm more relaxed, I'm going to tell you more stories and less information. So if you move up to the front, and you don't have to come all the way up the front, but in this area, and this table over here, unfortunately, I can't even see because of the stand in the middle, and that can cause me some real grief. So if you'd even come just one table over, I would be good. But I'm not doing this just because it makes me more comfortable if you come up here. As an educator, I also know how the brain works a little bit. I'm not an expert, but I certainly keep learning. And one of the things I know with students, with young brains being developed, by the way, the female brain ends being developed at about age 20. The male brain ends at 23. So those of us who have always thought that women are smarter, I guess they are. They get 3 more years to develop their brain. There's 2 times when individuals' brains are developing, the gray matter's developing, up to about 11, and then again a little older at about 14 to 16. There's also a 3rd time when the brain is developing, and that's when you're pregnant. So again, this idea that women's brains can get pretty, be well developed with this gray matter is there. But the other thing I know about the brain is you've got to do a couple of things. One is you have to get up and move a little bit. You notice I'm still standing, and that's about giving your body the signal that something is changing to keep interest in doing some of that. The other thing you have to do every basically 7 to 10 minutes with young children is you have to do what's called a brain dump. And that's when you turn a little bit and you tell your partner something you've already learned or a question you may have, or you summarize the last statements. And what we know now in education is if teachers aren't doing that, they might as well excuse the class after 7 minutes because they are not going to continue to retain information. So one of the things I'm going to challenge Greg here is we're going to do that every 7 minutes or so. We'll stop and ask you just to do something. So hopefully you recall what we were talking about for the 7 minutes before that. So, a great introduction to myself. Thank you, Greg. I do work in Manteca Unified, 23,000 students, 3,000 employees, well over 5 million lunches and breakfasts and dinners go out each year. I work in a district that serves population from 3 cities, the city of Manteca, the city of Lathrop, and the city of Stockton. 1/3 of our students actually go to school in the city of Stockton. And then we serve some general areas. So one of the things I know we wanted to make sure and convey is that I do have this dichotomy that I have to develop the current workforce that I have. I need to recruit and retain, just like many of you guys are challenged with doing, recruiting and retaining employees. And then I have the task of one of my customer bases is that future workforce. So we'll get into some of that in a little bit.
Sounds good.
We could probably sit now.
All right. Does this already feel a lot more invigorating and exciting than what you guys have been sitting through? All right, here we go. So this quote that you see in front of us, education is the civil rights battle of this generation, this actually comes directly from Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. And, you know, kind of a grandiose statement, but you know, the reality of it is, I put this in the context of, you know, our world at Intel, and when we think about the haves, the have-nots, these issue that, and education is an issue that faces all of us, whether you're a parent, an employer, so if you're in a position of hiring and managing folks, or just within an organization looking to have the best organization possible. When we think about even just going back 2 years ago, where the state of California facing double-digit unemployment, and a company like Intel with over 2,000 open engineering recs that we couldn't fill because we didn't have enough qualified students coming out of our education system here in California and the U.S. These are the things that will start getting us rather passionate about how do we look at this when we think about workforce development and where that's going. I'm going to show you. Well, actually, this is an interesting build, and I'm going to have Jason speak to this in terms of then contrasting what you see here and what's happening down in Manteca. One of the reasons why I wanted to invite him here today. So if you think about every 100 students that start 9th grade, and only 69 of them that ultimately graduate from high school, and of that, only 40 of them that immediately, and these are nationwide, you know, averages, right? But only 40 of those that immediately enroll into college, with 27 that are still enrolled in college, and then from there, only 18 that graduate on time. Those are rather, you know, again, kind of stunning numbers that should grab your attention and make you sit up and pay attention. But Jason, I want you to speak to how Manteca and what you're doing down there contrasts with these numbers.
Thank you. First off, I'm going to take you back to the slide that he just put, Arne Duncan. So real quick to your neighbor, what did Arne Duncan say education was? Civil right, right? Well, that's what the federal government believes education is. Most state government officials don't agree with that. Most state officials talk about education is a state right, and that education, by the constructs of our government system, the state should have the say in how education is done and managed. And then we have this little annoying thing throughout history called local control and school boards, and they think they should be in charge of education. And those three clash for us often in the education world. But what makes us a little bit, I think, unique in Manteca and also similar to everybody else is our school board has passionately taken on that responsibility of local control. They did it when the economic downturn hit us in directing me to lay off hundreds of employees to keep our district very, very solvent financially. And they kept us very solvent through that downturn, and we were not required to borrow money in order to continue educating children. And so when the economy turned back around, our board had a great deal of resources, about $50 million to be exact, that they could dump into educational projects. It was one-time monies. And there were some other districts that had that and many that didn't have that because of the way their boards had exerted local control. In our district, our board took a look at not one thing, but two things. And that the first thing they looked at was preparing our students for their future. And they actually said that was the most important thing that we needed to do as educators in Manteca Unified, prepare our students for their future. They then devoted the majority of the resources, 30 plus out of the 50 million, to us going digital in 2015. And by that, they defined that I had a year to get ready to do it, that they wanted to see devices being deployed in 2015. They wanted those devices to be deployed from kindergarten through 12th grade. They expected the infrastructure to be in place, and that infrastructure to be one that would be sustainable for at least 7 years and then beyond in the construct that it was. And they did all of this with a little bit different statistic. In Manteca Unified, we graduate well over 95% of our students. We have for years. Of those 95%, we know that those that graduate from us, 20% go on to four-year universities. Of those 20%, the majority, well above 90%, graduate. It may take them more than 4 years, but they graduate, they go on, and they get a successful career. 60% of our students go on to two-year programs and go into programs with certifications and AA degrees. I'll come back to that in a minute. The last 20%, they go into the military, they go into a family business, and we are an ag-based area, so there are several that go into that. They go into, maybe they are lucky and win the lottery or whatever, or they go to prison and they're incarcerated. All of those group we consider successful. The choices they made got them to where they're going and their livelihood that they're enjoying, right? We would prefer the majority of them are going to the military and those sorts of things. That 60% though, that 60% that we send on to two-year degrees, over 50% of those students never complete that two-year degree. They never complete that certificate. So we have 30% of our students in Manteca Unified that their future means all they have to hang on to is a high school diploma. And we know that that's not good enough for students to earn a living wage. So our numbers start out much higher than the numbers you saw, but we still have this group of students that we're very concerned about. That's why the district has given me the directive to take the district digital.
So I'm going to show you guys a quick video, maybe. kind of cool, gee whiz sort of stuff, right? The reality of it is everything that you see in that video, even though it maybe seems futuristic, every technology that's actually demonstrated in there is commercially available today in some form or fashion. There's some liberties taken with how it's implemented in that classroom. But there's a reason why I showed you, and it's not just to show you the gee whiz technology that's being utilized in that classroom. And I'm going to have Jason speak to this more in the context of, look at more how, when we think about the students, and the change, you know, when Jason made us stand up, he said, we're going to change things around a little bit. That's what they're doing at Manteca. And it started well before they started this Going Digital initiative, because it has everything to do about personalized learning. But Jason, I want you to speak to this audience about what can they take away from this as it pertains to then starting to think of the expectation of this next generation when they come into the workforce and what they are going to be, because they're coming out motivated to really get some incredible things done. What can you speak to that, both in how you guys are going about educating them, but if you're an employer sitting out here, what would you be mindful of, not only in the way of getting technology ready for them, but really more about preparing a work environment that's conducive for them to want to come to work, whether it be the state, county, whatever?
Again, I shared that, you know, I have two roles to fill: the workforce development of the 3,000 employees that I have working and serving the needs of our students, and then that future workforce. The technology you saw in there, we will have all of that in January in our district, in every single classroom. Our walls won't be that big. They won't be able to swipe things and throw them from the wall, but the technology is all there. This is my computer, a Surface 3 Pro. I worked up here a few hours ago, taking care of business back in the district. And this is the Panasonic 3E that we're deploying to all of the students. Kindergarten through 12th grade. We're handing this to kindergartners. The reality is the kindergartners are more ready for this device than our 12th graders. They are absolutely native to this thing. They've been handed it for years in the form of a cell phone, and they go to town when we give them the tools. The reality is our classrooms are no longer the repository of knowledge. They're no longer the repository of information. It's digitally out there. And what I'm most worried about as the employer is, do we ever hit a point where teachers are like travel agents? Really not needed. So how do we prepare our teachers to change their culture so that they can shift from being repositories of information and knowledge to being teachers of tools? How to use the digital tools, the mobile devices, so that the students can be accessing the knowledge and learning. So they're then prepared for their future. This device, like I said, has all the functionality of this device. Another thing it has is the same restrictions. So the fact that I can download a movie when I go home, the student can download a movie. The fact that I can get on a social network, the student can get on a social network. Now, we obviously are also educating our parents on, if you give them that access, you as a responsible parent need to be deciding what they have access to. We have all the government regulations at 13 and before 13, and we have to respond to all of those sorts of things. But what is absolutely amazing and also absolutely terrifying is when you give the students the tools. If you're not prepared and know how to use the tools, they will be within minutes. And that's when you have a situation where the student knows more than the teacher. And if we don't have that culture shift, if we don't have the teachers ready for that, what sort of environment does that lead to? Ultimately, it leads to our students coming out of our system and deciding where to work. And if what they have to get from somewhere is an antiquated system that doesn't pique their curiosity, grab their interest, motivate them, how long do they stay in that environment or that system? I'll do a very quick story. We ordered a studio. It's called Panasonic in a Box. It's got 2 cameras, a mixing board, microphones. It's got everything that's there, everything that's over there. And we invited 5 industrial fabrication students. So these are not high academic students. They're in our career technical academy that's creating and manufacturing primarily metal products. And we brought them into the room. We flew in the very expensive consultant, and we started the morning with the devices all in boxes. And the adults, the teachers, including myself, their tech teacher, a couple of other lead teachers, we stood in the back and watched as he showed the students how to unbox this studio, how to then connect the studio up, how to then utilize the studio and videotape me. Real world problems that these students were having to learn and then solve. Last Friday, without any further training, they videotaped me for the presentation I will be giving next week to all of our families throughout the district. They took it upon themselves after they had got that initial training that they went back as a group and met after hours and sent me a list. They figured they had been empowered that much that I now needed to buy them more equipment for them to get going. I just got the order from my secretary before I started this talk, because it was sent out to them, and they're making sure they get the equipment needed that they want. Now, that's very exciting to hear. First time I showed this device to students, I started at the high school level. I went down. When I got to first grade, I had a student look at me and go, "Can I have your credit card? I want to order an app." I didn't give it to her. We're not that far along, right? But that's where students are at. They are looking for these sort of environments and these sorts of challenges. And that's the workforce we hope to be pushing out here pretty quick.
I show this slide because I think it really is illustrative of, you know, if we look at education as an industry and compare it to what's happened recently in the music industry and with media and photography. You all know in the last 10 to 15 years how those industries have not only transformed, but legacy players who didn't have the agility to move in the direction that those industries were going to have essentially either gone away or are going away, right? If you worked for Kodak and look at now what's happened in the world of photography, or if, so we think about, you know, and this is what, and education is preceding government on this, but we can just as easily, we look, you know, now and a few years down the road, and this is just as easily government in transition to digital, right? At the rate that education is today. And it really starts to, hopefully it gets you all excited. As Jason just said, I think there's moments where it's a little bit frightening. But it really is kind of cool when you look at recent history and what's happened in other industries and what that means to us in the public sector. And there's no better visual example, I don't think, right now than what we're seeing in K-12 education. Jason, I'm going to just speak to this slide. I don't know if you can see this. This is, so we have, you know.
Oh, the millennials and the Gen, yeah, all that fun sort of stuff. Again, this is talking a little bit about what I was saying with kindergarten, right? But this translates to teachers as well. And so I'm going to jump there rather than to students, because I've given that illustration that our kindergartners, our first graders are more native to these devices than our high school kids. The high school kids' reaction to it was, if I drop it, are my parents going to have to pay for it? Now, I did that on purpose, right? Remember that learning brain thing? Turn to your neighbor real quick. What'd I just do that surprised you? Dropped it. Should I drop his or this one?
No.
No, okay? Because we're getting a purpose-built that's rugged for the kids. We know we're having to deal with that customer. Just like I'm sure law enforcement has much more rugged, I know they do, the tough books and things than desktop sort of machines. So the students are definitely exhibiting these sort of cultural bands, but more important, it's the teachers. Many people would assume that our young teachers, our teachers just coming in, are the ones most excited about the technology, and that would be inaccurate. Now, our teachers close to retirement are truly the least excited about the technology for the most part. That's because they've been practicing their craft for 30+ years, and they've been very successful at it. So to ask them in the last few years to shift up totally how they're doing things leads to some frustration, and we actually don't. We actually are asking them to slowly transition into some of this stuff. The challenge is those students that are just coming to us out of the educational system are coming through a system that was very standards-based, very focused on scope and sequence, pacing guides, those sort of things, and they teach just like they were taught. So those are the ones that are, again, not super excited about this. The band's about 30 to 45, maybe 35 to 45. That band of teacher was coming through the system before the standards movement, when there was cooperative learning, project-based learning, all those sorts of things. And I would expect some of this same stuff is going to translate out into any of the areas that you are responsible for as far as the workforce development. The one thing I would caution, just because I know you and I've had a conversation about our own kids, is the students coming out of university right now are probably further along than the ones I just talked about that came out a few years ago. It's not that we've been out of standards education, standards-based education that long, that direct drill and kill sort of system. But the university system's driven more by business. And since it's driven more by business, business shifted and has shifted much further on that scale we showed. So the students coming out of those four-year universities are much more native to this, much more expectant that they're going to be allowed to communicate in social network world, do some of those sorts of things. The group I'm more concerned about there are those students that are coming out of our system that are getting those two-year degrees or those certificate-type positions, or are being relied upon with just that high school diploma, because those are the students that have not been exposed to that different sort of a reality.
Yeah. So I'm going to, I think right now is a good time to open it up for some questions. And one of the things that Jason and I talked a bunch about over the last year is when we put this in the context of work. In how, because I talked about the transformation of the classroom over time, but in the workplace, right, we're now very much in an era where work is not a place you go, work is a thing you do. And that this is, what we're seeing happening in K-12 is very indicative of what that next generation workforce is going to come in with the mindset of. They're not just consuming information and then regurgitating that back, they are creating, they're collaborating, they're becoming critical thinkers with high communication skills. With that in mind, are there any questions that you all would like to ask of Jason at this stage of our conversation? We definitely have a couple of more topics that we can hit on, but any?
I'm glad you bring up communication. So one of the things that concerns me is how you combat what I'll just call it knowledge dilution, as more and more of the people that, or the sources that the kids are going to go to for information are other kids who may or may not actually have a correct answer. Now, I'll use an example of, if I need to find out something about how to change the air conditioning coolant in my car, I'm going to go to a forum, and there will be a well thought out post asking a question, and the answer will be some arbitrary thing that makes no sense whatsoever, or it may be bad information, and then they're going to learn that as, well, this is the correct answer.
Good. So the question I heard was that how are we combating or preparing for the fact that once we release students to the digital world and they can get information from anywhere, they can come across bad information or poor information, and how do we educate them on the skills necessary to determine that those things are good information or bad information? We actually are spending a lot of time doing that. And again, I have to start by getting the teachers prepared with those tools to do that. So we actually send out a video every day, a vlog every day to the teachers, because we're trying to model some of what we're hoping to see them do. And we're doing things like even keeping those videos very short, to 3 minutes. So every week, one of the topics is being a responsible digital learner, and the videos are created by a 5th grade teacher, and she then takes those videos and covers the topics that you just talked about. How do you verify that the information is valid? She talks about how do you cite sources appropriately. She talks about cyberbullying. We spend a great deal of time on that. And it is amazing to not only see her doing that and modeling it, but last Friday I got 2 videos from students at another school across in 2 different cities that are in 7th and 8th grade, and they had created their own videos of cyberbullying and what it looked like, and it would bring the room to tears, the 8th grade one.
But I think, Jay, speak to, because I think it's critical, there may be a point made earlier, and I hope you didn't take it the wrong way, but when you talk about, you know, the role of the teacher diminishing or possibly going away, I don't think that you in any way meant that that is actually something you envision at all. What I think you meant to say, or wanted to, and I want to emphasize this because it's germane to your question, that the role of the teacher changes. And actually, in some cases, becomes even more important, very specific to what you're talking to. Because if we're, I look at it like this. In today's world, right, if I was a 7th grade student today as compared to when I was a 7th grade student, the amount of knowledge that I'm able to come into 7th grade already having available at my fingertips in the matter of a couple of seconds by being able to go out on Google is way up here, right? Whereas in my era, I had to learn all of that from the ground up. Well, if we can assume that that's the new norm, but we still have to make sure that every student has the fundamentals to get from here to here, and then they can advance those critical learning or thinking skills above and beyond that. That then becomes the new and evolving role of the teacher. Is that, you're the expert.
Yeah,
I want to make sure we get that.
Yeah, in general, I appreciate you reemphasizing that fact that I in no way expect teachers or their roles diminishing. You know, that's why we are doing all of this, is to make sure that the teachers do not go the way of the storefront travel agent, that they are still absolutely critical to educating students. That is my primary role. The one thing you talked about is building fundamental knowledge to access other knowledge. And I think we're talking about shifting, and I want to make this real clear. We're talking about shifting the relationship between teaching and learning, not between teachers and learners. Because in our district, we already have an incredible culture that is demonstrated by a very low dropout rate, very high attendance rate, all those sort of things, of a relationship between a teacher and a learner. But what we have to change in order for those students to be successful in their future is that relationship between teaching and learning, which means we have to be genuine and real in how we are teaching the tools so that the student can determine if the information is accurate, appropriate, worthy of their understanding or not. The reality is Wikipedia is more accurate than the encyclopedia is. Now, there are inaccurate statements in Wikipedia, but because of its breadth and because of its perspective, multiple perspectives, there have been many educators that have demonstrated that it is more accurate than a very simple column in an old encyclopedia. So I think that's real key. I want to go back to one other piece, because again, I want to make sure your brains are stimulated. This morning, Microsoft announced that you could now Bing with emojis. This is huge, huge in education. Would you talk at your table group real quick and tell me what do you think that means, and why do I think it's important and huge in education? I'll say it again. At Microsoft announced today that you can now Bing with emojis.
Anybody want to offer up a?
Anybody want to? Yeah. Anybody want to give an idea or a thought, a reason? How many people know what Bing is? Good, it's a search engine. And the reason I talk about Bing is back to what you're talking about. For education, Bing is amazing, and we're not having to compromise in our district. We're using Bing because Bing is connected to the Common Core standards. Bing is connected to information that is much more sound than some of the other search engines, and we educate our students on that. That's why we recommend they use Bing in the classroom and that sort of thing. Okay, then the second part was emoji. How many people know what emoji is? Okay, emojis, the little characters, right, the little smiley faces and all that sort of stuff. Emoticon, right, an icon, that sort of thing. So why did I say it's important that students can Bing with emojis? Because they can put it in more context. Now, it's not our context, right? This is what I'm talking about with students, us preparing students for their future. They think in emojis. I don't think an emoji. I never would think to go find a little picture of a bride and a picture of a party and put that into Bing to search for bridal party, right? But our students do think that way. It's the same thing when we talk about, we want to still educate them on proper standard English and in what forms and formats they need to be using that and those sort of things. We also want to educate them fully on texting. And we need to educate ourselves fully on texting because they're communicating around us. And that's where we absolutely got to be pulling them in. Same with emojis. So other questions? Do you want to do other questions?
Yeah, we've got another question right here in the front.
And actually what you just said is a perfect segue to what I'm going to ask you next. There's been a lot of studies recently. I recently did my master's in curriculum design and instruction. And there were a lot of studies that we looked at that say actually communicating digitally is not preparing young people for both relationships with any depth or being able to communicate with any depth. And a couple of things they brought up that I thought were significant for students. And so my question is, how do we balance this? But the examples are one that handwriting is a different brain function than typing. And that you can actually type without paying attention to what you're reading, whereas writing you have to pay attention and it's a better way to remember. The other was that piece about communicating that because children or young people, I have two at home, so I know, 20-year-old and a teenager, their texts are short. There's no body language, there's no tone of voice, and so sometimes they misread that. So the emoticons, to some degree, are a way for them to enter that in. But how do we balance then that whole making sure they can communicate with more depth and the whole digital piece?
Perfect. Would y'all stand up again? You can kind of do this. Okay, and I'll answer the question standing up. So the question was, this whole idea of what effect is the computer having on learning, curriculum design. There's a lot of study, obviously, to be doing that. Basically, where I'm really watching right now is what's called flash technology. It's that quick flash, constantly going input. And the brain research is saying that, yes, it is changing the brain in the young learner, the adolescent learner. What's not clear yet is whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, but it is clear that it is changing it. So what we talk about in Manteca Unified is there will still be times when this needs to be shut off. And again, back to that teacher, the teacher has the full control of the computers when the computers are in their classroom. So if students are going off and doing something, they actually can physically touch a button and turn every student's computer off. They can take and pull every student's computer up to that slide if they want to do that. The one thing where we are very pleased that we did not compromise, and again, I would really recommend those of you looking to this future workforce to be getting out in front of even what we're talking about today. The majority, 95% of students have internet access. 95% of students have internet access in the United States. The problem is they have internet access on one of these, and that promotes the texting and some of that. This is a very different device. This is the same as my device. One of the key things that is amazing about this device that we're giving to our students as young as kindergarten all the way through 12th grade is it has active inking. So we will not be only typing. We actually are not going to be teaching typing any younger than we currently teach it, which is at high school, because we are going to be engaging students using the active inking sort of stuff. And that all comes back from the brain research. Now, future employers, You're going to have students coming out that know this technology. It'll be well beyond this by the time the kindergartners get there, right? So this active inking. These things are huge. The smarter balance assessment that we have to take in California. It's going to be very interesting to see if the state of California lets us use active inking to take that test versus forcing kids that are developmentally not ready to type in their answers into that test. So a lot of things going. Thanks for standing.
All right, time check. I'm going to go ahead and move on to this next visual so we can just make a couple of added points and hopefully leave time for some additional questions. By the way, that picture, my son and his best friend, first day of school, heading off to be seniors in school. And I only show it just because when we think about, you know, we think about job codes. We think about what are the things that, you know, because we're looking at our current list of things that we have in any of our organizations, and we know that those are not going to be the job codes of 5 years from now. I mean, it is changing at this accelerated rate. And one of the things I was going to point out here, we have advanced STEAM. I don't know if you guys follow this. You know, for years we've just referred to this as STEM by itself: science, technology, engineering, and math. The A is adding arts to that. And I showed that picture before because those two guys that were on that, you know, dumb little car heading to their first day of being seniors in high school, they're submitting their applications to colleges right now for, both of them are interested in the same area: music engineering. Not a liberal arts degree. They're actually looking to go after engineering degrees that is in the area of music. Super interesting stuff. I mean, I'm sitting there myself trying to think of what the heck does that really mean. It was interesting as we traveled up and down the state of California talking to UC Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Cal State Long Beach, Chico State, etc. Almost every single one of those higher ed institutions said, this is absolutely an area that we see as growing, and it's going faster than even they can prepare for it. Out of every single school that we visited, only one actually had a degree program specific to that was in their engineering area, not in the liberal arts area. But I pointed out, just because, again, from an employment standpoint, as an employer, when you think about what do we need to do to be ready for these students coming into the workforce in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, you know, it's really illustrative of that, I think.
Yeah, I'll share another quick story. And again, Manteca Unified, we have over 65% of our students on free and reduced lunch. And the student that I'm going to talk about now actually goes to one of our county programs immediately to the north, and they deal with students that are, you know, certainly have made some choices that have gotten them expelled from the regular system, but they also run some charter schools, which are pretty amazing. But these are not students that are looking to go to a four-year college. That's not what they have selected to do. Now, ultimately, many of them are prepared and do go on to four-year colleges, but that's not where they're at the time they make this choice into the charter school. So this one young man, they got a 3D printer into the school, and he was a junior or a senior, and the 3D printer was there, and he asked if he had access to the 3D printer, and the answer was yes. And the next question he asked was, could he have the manual for the 3D printer? And the answer was yes. And the third thing was, could he use the 3D printer? And the answer was yes. 2 weeks later, the teacher came in to see another fully functioning 3D printer. The young man took the manual, realized that he could print almost every single part from the 3D printer to replace on the 3D printer. He then had to go and ask his parents to buy something. I think it's the board that runs it or something that does that. And he now owned his own 3D printer. These are the students that are coming into the workforce. And we start talking about STEM and STEAM. You talked about your son looking at that sort of engineering program. My daughter just went off to Long Beach, and I'm very proud of her. She wants to be a biomedical engineer. And again, not a field that I've really ever learned much about, and I'm very pleased that she's looking forward to that. She came home this last weekend to spend time with us, and she informed us that she wants to get a second degree, and that is in German. So again, she wants to add art language arts, learning German, into her career choice. And her reason is very simple. She says that the majority of biomedical engineering still has to do with mechanical engineering. The majority of mechanical engineering is still going on in German in Germany, and so she's preparing for her future that way. These are the students coming out. My job is to recruit and retain as an employer. Are they going to even look? Are they even going to look at the industry that I'm managing and running?
Jason, maybe emphasize the point, because you made this point to me earlier, about the culture that you're fostering at Manteca, where you're opening things up. You tell the story about the student with the 3D printer, and that required faith. You said, do it. He asked, you said yes. Because in public sector in general, we have a tendency of saying no, right? We want to lock things down. We don't want to give administrative rights to our users. We don't want to tell people that they can go to social media, that they can take the device home. Talk about the culture that you're fostering there and how you've seen it firsthand. You told me the story about the teacher coming from a different district, right, coming in recently.
I can do that one. We're like many of you. We lock a lot of the device down. We don't currently give our teachers admin rights. We're actually struggling with that right now. We probably are ultimately going to give our teachers admin rights because they're demanding it. They're saying they need it in order to access some of these tools. But giving access, in my opinion, requires that you also have accountability and that you make it very clear that with great power comes great responsibility. And we do that with our students as well, and we are planning for that currently. So our devices are not locked down for teachers to be doing things like accessing social networking and downloading their own apps, downloading their own music, downloading their own games, those sorts of things on the device. On their off time, they can go ahead and do any of that sort of stuff. The students will have the same rights on their devices. And as you said, it's about us not saying no. So we had a teacher that I ran across last night, because I actively participate in doing some of the training of our teachers for them to get their devices. And this teacher, new teacher, came from the district immediately to our west, Tracy Unified. Last year, she was trained in the device. She had the device. So when she came to the training last night, she was not happy. She was required to sit through our training when she already knew how to use this Surface device. Why was she doing that? 10 minutes into the training, as she realized that the first things we were doing was giving and showing them access to the device, her entire demeanor changed. She said, in Tracy, they locked me out of all of this. In Tracy, they wouldn't let me do this. Now, I don't know why and how that decision was made, but that's what she reported. She went from being shut down, non-productive for potentially 3 hours of this training, to being absolutely engaged, sharing with teachers around her some of the resources she had already found, talking about how she could use this in the classroom, how she was able to do this because she had less tethered access to the device. We also need to remember that that infrastructure is so huge. Every employee in Manteca Unified and every student in Manteca Unified has 1 terabyte of storage in the cloud. 1 terabyte is huge. And we had to get a partner that does that, which is Microsoft, right? But the reality is, our teachers probably won't ever fill up 1 terabyte. I bet our kindergartners do by the time they graduate. I bet we're having to get more space for our kindergartners.
So I saw Russ giving me the hook. Number one, was this valuable? Yeah. Any last questions for Jason while we have him here? I see a hand coming up here. Go ahead.
So you certainly are pointing out how those that have the aptitude to do these advanced things, like building their own 3D printer, have more ability to use these advanced methods. But how about those that have no aptitude and now suddenly have more opportunity for distraction? And along those lines is a more engaging opportunity for distraction. Hey, I can play Angry Bird for 10 hours now. Whereas before, if I was a kid that had nothing available, I had to go outside, cut a branch off a tree, make my own bow and arrow. But at least I had to think about something, right?
Absolutely. I'm going to take way too long to answer the question, so we may have to go offline to do it. But what I will share is there's a lot of research going on gamification, those sort of things that invite like Minecraft and sort of those things that engage students in the appropriate place to be doing some of those sorts of things. I stated earlier there are still times when the device has to be shut off. I will tell you the most exciting things I see going are in special ed with these devices, are when we start talking about aptitude, because quite honestly, I don't believe that aptitude is limited in children. I absolutely believe that we need to find what that aptitude is, celebrate it, and talk about growth genius rather than finite genius, and I see it demonstrated every day, all the time. We had a sophomore who I was involved in expelling because he had gotten into a fight. He graduated last year. He was flunking school, doing everything. He went to our culinary academy. He was out using this sort of technology to do that sort of stuff, because once you spark that curiosity, what kids do is not give up. In the United States, average is like 7 minutes before a kid gives up. In Asian countries, it's like an hour and a half. Then they ask for help. Then they go back and do it. That's what we've got to change the culture of, because then the question about whether or not they have the aptitude kind of goes away.
Yeah. Well, and wasn't that a point that you made earlier, and I think this will be our final comment, what your going digital within Manteca was specifically to address that exact segment that you just referred to. I mean, because they with, you know, over 90% success rate of kids graduating, et cetera, what they're really trying to do was address that particular audience that you just mentioned. Anyway, thank you, Jason. I really appreciate you taking your valuable time to come here and share your experiences with this audience. And thank you all. Again, I hope this was a good use of your time.
Enjoy the work. Thanks.